Picture yourself stepping into the heart of a medieval city where the narrow streets hum with energy voices shouting in a dozen languages. The rich aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with exotic spices from distant lands, and the rhythmic clatter of hooves on cobblestones as carts laden with goods rumble past. This wasn't just a marketplace, it was a revolution in motion. Long before skyscrapers or stock exchanges, these bustling squares were the birthplaces of modern Europe, where fortunes were made, empires took shape, and the very idea of urban life was reinvented. What began as simple gatherings of traders under open skies grew into the beating hearts of cities like Paris, Bruges, and Venice, places where the fate of nations could hinge on the price of wool or the arrival of a single ship. But how did these chaotic, vibrant markets become so much more than just places to buy and sell? The answer lies in something deeper than commerce. It's about connection. Every sack of grain, every bolt of silk, every barrel of wine carried with it stories of distant lands, new ideas, and the dreams of people who dared to think bigger. Medieval markets were melting pots where cultures collided, where a farmer from Flanders might rub shoulders with a spice merchant from Alexandria, sparking innovations that would ripple across centuries. This was where the modern world began to take shape, not in palaces or battlefields, but in the gritty, glorious chaos of trade. And that's the story we're about to unravel. Over the next few minutes, we'll travel back to a time when a handful of coins could change the course of history, when guilds wielded power rivaling kings, and when the simple act of buying and selling forged the cities we know today. From the shadowy alleys of London's Cheapside to the sun-drenched stalls of Constantinople, we'll discover how markets became the invisible hands that built Europe, and how their legacy still echoes in every bustling street corner, every crowded cafe, every thriving metropolis. So settle in, because this isn't just a tale of the past. It's the story of how trade shaped the world we live in now, and it all starts with the clink of a coin on a medieval counter. To understand why medieval markets emerged where they did, imagine the map of Europe as a vast, living network of pathways, rivers snaking through valleys, ancient Roman roads still connecting settlements, and rugged mountain passes where traders risked everything to move their goods. The most successful markets didn't just happen by accident. They bloomed where geography and human ingenuity met, at the crossroads of necessity and opportunity. Take the bustling market towns along the Rhine River, for example. Here, boats laden with timber from the Black Forest could float downstream to sell their wares, while merchants from the North Sea brought salted herring and wool to trade. The river wasn't just water, it was a liquid highway, a natural gift that made transport faster and cheaper than hauling goods over land. And where rivers met roads, towns like Cologne and Mainz exploded into hubs of commerce, their markets swelling with goods from hundreds of miles away. But water wasn't the only magnet for trade. Castles and monasteries became anchors for market life, offering something even more precious than convenience: safety. In an age of bandits and rival lords, a marketplace under the shadow of a fortress or within the sanctified walls of an abbey meant protection. The church, in particular, held enormous sway. Bishops and abbots often granted market charters, official permissions that turned a sleepy village into a thriving town. These charters weren't just pieces of parchment. They were golden tickets, attracting craftsmen, merchants, and hungry settlers eager to earn a living. And that's how the magic happened. A humble crossroads, blessed with a charter, could transform almost overnight. Peasants who once bartered eggs for cloth in their village now had access to Flemish wool, Italian silks, and Baltic amber. Local lords, once content with taxing farmers, suddenly saw the value in protecting traders. More merchants meant more tolls, more wealth, more power. What began as a weekly gathering of farmers selling grain would, over decades, grow into a permanent marketplace with stone stalls, guild halls, and even paved streets. This was the quiet revolution of the medieval world. Markets didn't just move goods, they moved people, ideas, and entire economies. A farmer who once grew just enough to feed his family now had a reason to plant extra crops for sale. A craftsman who made nails in his hut could now sell to buyers from 3 towns over. And as money changed hands, something even more profound took root: the beginnings of a new urban world, where wealth wasn't just measured in land or titles, but in the clink of coins and the promise of opportunity. The real magic of medieval markets wasn't just what was sold, it was how far those goods had traveled to get there. Imagine a merchant in 14th century Paris unwrapping a bundle of pepper, each tiny black grain having crossed deserts on camelback, sailed aboard Venetian galleys, and been hauled over Alpine passes by mule trains before finally reaching his stall. That pepper wasn't just a spice, it was proof of an invisible web stretching thousands of miles, linking backwater towns to the glittering capitals of Byzantium and beyond. This was the power of Europe's great trade routes, the hidden arteries that kept markets alive. The Silk Road might be the most famous, but it was just one thread in a vast tapestry. Up north, the Amber Road funneled golden resin from the Baltic to the Mediterranean, where it was carved into beads and amulets for the wealthy. The salt roads crisscrossed the continent, turning white crystals from places like Lüneburg into currency as valuable as gold in an era before refrigeration. And then there were the sea lanes, the Hanseatic League's ships shuttling timber and furs between Novgorod and London, while Italian navigators charted courses to Alexandria for silks and sugar. But these routes did more than move merchandise, they moved minds. A Persian astrolabe might wind up in a Spanish scholar's hands, revolutionizing navigation. A Chinese printing technique could inspire a German craftsman to tinker with movable type. Even disasters had unintended consequences. When the Black Death hitched rides on Geno's merchant ships, it didn't just kill millions, it reshaped labor markets, sparking peasant revolts that would topple feudal systems. The cities that mastered these flows became powerhouses. Venice didn't just sell goods, it sold access, becoming the Amazon of its day by controlling choke points between east and west. Bruges turned its canals into a stock exchange where deals were struck in a dozen languages, and in places like Champagne, great fairs rotated between towns, creating temporary metropolises where Florentine bankers, Norse furriers, and Arab glassmakers haggled under the same tents. What's astonishing isn't just the scale of this network, it's how fragile it all was. A single Mongol raid could shut down the Silk Road for years. A shift in wind patterns might doom a fleet of grain ships. Yet against all odds, these thin threads of trade held firm, bending but rarely breaking, because every merchant knew what we've since forgotten, that a sack of cloves in Lisbon or a bolt of damask in Riga wasn't just a commodity. It was a promise that somewhere beyond the horizon, another market waited, another deal could be made, and the great dance of exchange would never truly end. Imagine holding a piece of parchment that could turn your muddy village into a thriving town. That's exactly what a market charter meant in the medieval world. These weren't just documents, they were golden keys to prosperity, signed and sealed by kings, bishops, or local lords. With a single stroke of a pen, a sleepy settlement could suddenly claim the exclusive right to host weekly markets, transforming it into a magnet for traders, craftsmen, and fortune seekers. But what made these charters so powerful? It wasn't just about permission to sell goods, it was about protection, order, and a promise of fairness in an era where trust was as rare as gold. Take the charter granted to the English town of St. Ives in the year 1200. Before the document arrived, it was little more than a riverside stop for fishermen. But once King John's seal was pressed onto that parchment, everything changed. The charter didn't just allow a market, it guaranteed safe passage for merchants within a 7-mile radius, banned rival markets on the same day, and even set up courts to settle disputes on the spot. Within decades, St. Ives became a bustling hub where Flemish weavers, French wine cellars, and local farmers clinked coins under the same rooftops. The secret to these charters wasn't just their privileges, it was their rules. Ever been to a market where you worried the butcher's scales were rigged or the cloth merchant's wool was secretly mixed with straw? Medieval shoppers faced the same scams daily. That's why charters spelled out everything from the width of a loaf of bread to the exact size of a gallon of ale. In places like Frankfurt, inspectors patrolled the marketplace with iron rods, standardized measures stamped right into the metal, ready to crack down on cheats. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was the birth of consumer protection, a way to build trust in an economy where reputation meant everything, and the competition for these charters. Fiercer than a bidding war at a spice auction, towns schemed, bribed, and even forged documents to get them. When the Count of Flanders granted Bruges its charter in the 10th century, nearby towns howled in protest. They knew their markets would wither without exclusive rights. That's why some lords played rivals against each other, dangling charters like carrots to see who'd offer the highest taxes in return. The winners didn't just gain a marketplace, they gained a monopoly, a legal wall that kept wealth flowing into their streets while others starved for trade. Yet the real legacy of these charters wasn't in the ink or the seals, it was in the stone and timber they inspired. A town with a thriving market needed permanent stalls, warehouses, guild halls, and paved streets. It needed moneychangers to handle foreign coins and innkeepers to house traveling merchants. Over time, these practical necessities grew into something grander, the skeleton of a true city. The cobblestones of places like Ghent or York still whisper this truth that commerce, when given the right to flourish, doesn't just fill purses, it builds civilizations. Beneath the colorful awnings and crowded stalls of every great medieval market lurked an invisible force, one that set prices, settled disputes, and even decided who could sell what. These were the merchant guilds, the secret engines that turned chaos into commerce. Picture a group of traders huddled in a candlelit hall, not just discussing profits, but drafting laws, building hospitals, and negotiating with kings. This wasn't just business, it was a quiet takeover of power, one silken thread and silver coin at a time. What gave guilds their teeth was control. In cities like Florence or Hamburg, you couldn't simply set up a stall and start selling. First, you'd kneel before the guild masters, swear oaths, and pay hefty fees, sometimes even proving your skills in grueling tests. A draper in Ghent might spend years as an apprentice, dyeing wool in cramped workshops before earning the right to sell his own cloth. These weren't arbitrary hurdles, they were quality guarantees. Guilds policed their trades with ruthless precision, inspecting goods, destroying shoddy work, and fining cheaters. Walk through any market square, and you'd see their handiwork standardized weights stamped with guild seals, cloth measured to exact lengths, bread loaves uniform in size. But guilds weren't just medieval regulators, they were proto-governments. When the Thames froze over, London's fishmongers' guild paid to break the ice so trade could flow. In Bruges, the powerful Hanseatic League built lighthouses and dredged canals to keep ships coming. and woe to any lord who crossed them. When a German duke tried taxing guild merchants too heavily, they simply rerouted entire trade routes overnight, starving his coffers until he capitulated. Their power plays reshaped maps. Entire cities rose or fell based on where guilds chose to invest. Yet for all their might, guilds had a softer side. They operated the original social safety nets, burying dead members with dignity, supporting widows with pensions, even schooling orphans in the trade. A sick goldsmith in Paris knew his workshop would keep running, his family fed, thanks to guild coffers. This wasn't charity, it was loyalty, and that loyalty built something extraordinary, a merchant class with the unity and resources to challenge feudal lords. The echoes of guilds still surround us, modern unions fighting for fair wages. That's guild DNA, chambers of commerce lobbying for business-friendly laws. A page straight from the guild playbook. Even today's trademarks and made-local movements trace back to those medieval seals of approval. The real lesson isn't just about commerce, it's about how ordinary people, when organized, can bend the arc of history. Those guild halls may be museums now, but their legacy lives on every time workers negotiate a contract or a small business owner joins forces with peers. The medieval merchants proved one timeless truth: there's strength in unity, and money talks louder than swords. While merchant guilds ruled the marketplace, another power was quietly reshaping Europe's cities: the craft guilds. These weren't just clubs for tradesmen, they were the factories of the Middle Ages, turning raw materials into prosperity one hammer strike, loom shuttle, and oven-fired loaf at a time. Walk through the streets of 14th century Florence, and you'd hear the rhythmic clang of blacksmiths' anvils in the armorer's quarter, smell the tang of dye vats from the wool guild's workshops, and see apprentices scurrying with baskets of fresh bread stamped with their master's seals. This wasn't just noise, it was the sound of a continent reinventing itself through skill. What made craft guilds extraordinary wasn't just what they made, but how they made it. Take a simple barrel, for example. In a world without refrigeration, a well-crafted cask could mean the difference between wine arriving in London as liquid gold or vinegar. That's why the Cooper's Guild enforced brutal standards. Apprentices spent 7 years mastering the exact curvature of staves, the tightness of iron hoops, even the scent of the oak to ensure quality. Similar rigor applied everywhere. Parisian glaziers mixed powdered cobalt into glass for cathedral windows under sworn secrecy, while Nuremberg locksmiths engineered mechanisms so intricate, guild laws forbade sharing designs beyond city walls. But guilds weren't just about protecting techniques, they were incubators of innovation. When the Black Death wiped out half of Europe's population, surviving craftsmen suddenly had bargaining power. Wage demands forced guilds to streamline production, leading to breakthroughs like the spinning wheel for weavers or water-powered hammers for metalworkers. In places like Milan, armorers developed layered steel techniques that made their plate mail the envy of kings, while Flemish tapestry weavers pioneered methods so advanced their work hung in papal palaces. This wasn't just progress, it was a quiet industrial revolution centuries before the steam engine. The real genius of craft guilds, though, lay in their structure. Picture a teenage boy in medieval Cologne signing his life away as a baker's apprentice. For years, he'd rise before dawn to knead dough, sweep ashes, and watch, never touching the oven until deemed ready. Only after crafting a masterpiece, literally a work-proving mastery, could he open his own shop. This system, replicated across dozens of trades, created something radical, a meritocracy where skill trumped birthright. A peasant's son with deft hands could rise to guild leadership, rub shoulders with patricians, even help draft city laws, and that's how craft guilds became political forces. In cities like Ghent, textile guilds financed rebellions against nobles who taxed their wool too heavily. Venetian glassblowers secured laws banning foreign competitors from imitating their coveted Cristallo glass. Over time, guild halls doubled as courthouses, their leaders sitting alongside bishops and mayors. The message was clear: control the crafts and you controlled the city's wealth and its future. The legacy of these guilds lingers in ways we rarely notice. Modern apprenticeship programs descended from guild training systems, made in labels guaranteeing quality. A direct echo of guild seals. Even today's labor unions owe their DNA to these medieval collectives, but perhaps their greatest gift was the idea that skilled labor deserved dignity, that the hands shaping wood, metal, and cloth were as vital to civilization as the swords of knights or the prayers of monks. In the soot-stained workshops of Europe's guilds, the modern world was being forged, one meticulous craft at a time. If you thought medieval markets were just places to haggle over cabbages and chickens, think again. The great annual fairs were the blockbuster events of their age, combining the frenzy of a modern stock exchange with the spectacle of a carnival. Picture the Champagne fairs, where for 6 riotous weeks each year, the French countryside transformed into a medieval mega-mall. Merchants from Genoa unpacked silks beside Flemish wool traders, while Arabic spice sellers demonstrated how to grind peppercorns to skeptical northerners. But what really set these fairs apart wasn't the goods, it was the atmosphere. Acrobats tumbled between stalls, minstrels belted out bawdy ballads about cheating tavern keepers, and the scent of roasting pork mingled with the tang of newly tanned leather. This wasn't just shopping, it was sensory overload. The genius of these fairs lay in their timing. Like a carefully choreographed dance, the circuit moved between towns' Troys in summer, Provence in autumn, giving each locale a chance to shine while keeping goods flowing year-round. Cloth from Bruges might arrive at the May Fair, only to be resold as finished garments by September. But the real social alchemy happened after hours, when merchants from rival cities shared wineskins under the stars, swapping not just goods but gossip, innovations, and occasionally brides. Marriage contracts were often negotiated alongside shipments of alum and wax, binding families and their businesses across borders. Beyond the revelry, these fairs were cultural melting pots. A German knight might taste his first orange at an Italian merchant's stall, while a Parisian scribe could commission a new ink recipe from a Moorish apothecary. Even the humblest peasant could glimpse exotic wonders: African ivory chess pieces, Byzantine enamels, or the latest Italian accounting gadget, the abacus. Fairs became rumor mills where news traveled faster than royal couriers, spreading word of distant wars, papal decrees, or promising new trade routes. The legacy of these gatherings lingers in surprising ways. Modern trade shows with their flashy booths and networking happy hours, direct descendants. The concept of seasonal sales, rooted in fair schedules, but what we've lost is the sheer audacity of turning commerce into celebration, where a deal sealed with a handshake might be celebrated with a spontaneous jig, and where the wealth of nations changed hands to the soundtrack of laughter and loot. These weren't just markets, they were the medieval internet, vibrant, unpredictable, and utterly transformative. Picture a medieval merchant trying to buy a bolt of Flemish cloth with a basket of eggs. It's no wonder Europe's markets demanded something better than barter. The real game changer came in the form of tiny silver discs, each stamped with the face of a king or the cross of a bishop. These weren't just coins, they were portable trust, a way to carry a month's wages in your palm or settle a debt across borders without hauling sacks of grain. When Charlemagne standardized the silver penny across his empire in the 8th century, he didn't just create currency, he built the rails for an economic revolution. Take the humble groat, a thick silver coin minted in 14th century England. Its weight and purity were guaranteed by the crown, meaning a wool merchant in York could accept it from a German buyer without biting the metal to test its worth. This reliability sparked an explosion of trade suddenly. A farmer could sell his harvest for coins, then use those same coins to pay a blacksmith for tools, who in turn paid a mason to build his workshop. Money became the invisible thread weaving together entire communities. Cities like London and Frankfurt thrived because they hosted royal mints, where silver from German mines or Byzantine treasures was melted down and reborn as currency, each strike of the die echoing like a heartbeat of commerce. But coins did more than simplify transactions. They birthed the idea of abstract value. A Florentine gold florin, stamped with the city's iconic lily, wasn't valuable because of its metal content alone. Its worth came from the reputation of the Florentine banks that stood behind it. Traders from Cairo to Bruges accepted these coins not because they trusted gold, but because they trusted florins. This leap of faith paved the way for even more radical ideas, like credit. Italian merchants began issuing paper bills redeemable for coins, allowing deals to happen across continents without physical cash ever changing hands. The Medici family didn't just sell silk, they sold certainty, transforming their ledgers into a kind of medieval cryptocurrency, yet the power of coins cut both ways. When English kings debased their currency by mixing silver with cheap metals to fund wars, markets reeled, prices soared, and foreign merchants demanded payment in heavier foreign coins. In response, cities like Lübeck began minting their own trusted currencies, while Jewish and Lombard moneylenders set up benches banchi in Italian to exchange coins and assess their true worth. These benches would evolve into Europe's first banks, complete with deposit accounts and even early checks. The true legacy of medieval money isn't just in purses or vaults, it's in the streets we walk today. Where coins flowed freely, towns expanded. Cobblestones replaced mud paths, guild halls rose taller than church spires, and inns with strongboxes catered to traveling merchants. The very skyline of Europe was reshaped by the clink of silver on counting tables, proving that wealth, when allowed to move freely, doesn't just build markets, it builds civilizations. Imagine a medieval trade network so powerful it could blockade entire kingdoms, dictate prices across continents, and operate like a shadow empire. Welcome to the Hanseatic League. This wasn't just a guild or a loose alliance. It was a mercantile superpower that rewrote the rules of commerce. At its height, the League's reach stretched from the foggy wharfs of London to the frozen harbors of Novgorod, with over 200 cities swearing allegiance to its strict codes. What began as a handful of German traders banding together for safety became a force that kings feared and merchants revered, the secret to their success. Control of the North Sea's liquid gold herring. Every summer, when vast shoals of silver fish swarmed the Baltic, Hanseatic fleets descended like clockwork. Their fishermen perfected techniques to salt and barrel the catch, preserving it for months. Suddenly, a humble fish became a currency, traded for Russian furs, English wool, and Flemish cloth. But the League didn't stop there. They built contours fortified trading posts in key cities like Bergen and Bruges. These weren't just warehouses, they were mini-city-states with their own laws, courts, and even militias. In Bergen's brigand district, German merchants lived in towering wooden halls, their ledgers recording deals that could make or break regional economies. What set the Hanse apart was its ruthlessness. When the King of Denmark tried taxing their ships too heavily in 1368, the League didn't protest, it declared war. Merchant vessels transformed into warships, blockading Copenhagen until the king surrendered. The resulting Treaty of Stralsund granted the Hanseatic League unprecedented rights. exemption from tariffs, a say in Danish royal succession, and control over key Baltic fortresses. No corporation today wields such geopolitical clout, yet for all its muscle, the League's real genius lay in its systems. They pioneered trade protocols still used today: standardized contracts, debt arbitration, even maritime insurance. Their cog ships, with their distinctive rounded hulls, became the cargo planes of the medieval world, carrying everything from Prussian amber to Icelandic falcons. And their communication network, courier routes, relayed price fluctuations between cities faster than royal couriers could deliver decrees. The League's decline came not from defeat, but from the very thing it championed: innovation. As the Renaissance dawned, Dutch and English ships grew faster, bypassing Hanseatic middlemen. The contours emptied, their ledgers gathering dust. But walk through Lübeck's Holstentor Gate today, and you'll see the League's legacy etched in brick, a reminder that commerce, when organized with vision and grit, can shape empires without a crown. The difference between a sleepy market town and a roaring medieval metropolis wasn't just size, it was destiny. Picture two settlements on the same river, one with a handful of stalls selling turnips and wool, the other teeming with ships unloading spices from Alexandria and bankers haggling over interest rates. Both played vital roles in Europe's economic web, but their fates hinged on three invisible forces: geography, greed, and sheer luck. Take Cologne, perched where the Rhine met overland trade routes to the east. Its cathedral might scrape the heavens, but the real miracle was its marketplace, a whirlwind of Flemish cloth, Russian furs, and Italian glass. Compare that to a modest town like Stourbridge in England, where farmers hawked grain and leather once a week. Both had charters, both had guilds, but Cologne had something Stourbridge lacked: a golden bottleneck. Every merchant heading from Bruges to Prague had to cross that river, paying tolls, renting warehouses, and fueling an economy that built towers instead of timber stalls. Political favor could catapult a town into the big leagues overnight. When the Counts of Champagne declared their lands neutral territory for trade fairs, sleepy Provence became the Wall Street of wool. Meanwhile, towns just a day's ride away withered, their markets shriveling like unpicked fruit. Kings and popes played this game, ruthlessly granting one city the right to mint coins while forbidding its rivals, or letting favored ports bypass customs while others drowned in taxes. In Florence, the Medici family didn't just bankroll artists, they bankrolled infrastructure, paving streets wide enough for ox carts loaded with silk to reach the docks faster than competitors in Siena. Yet some towns thrived by knowing their niche. Southampton never rivaled London, but its wine trade with Bordeaux made it indispensable every autumn. The harbour stank of fermenting grapes as barrels rolled into cellars across England. These secondary hubs were the capillaries of medieval commerce, feeding cities without challenging them. A weaver in Ghent might buy English wool via middlemen in Antwerp, creating a chain of specialized markets where each link took its cut. The true test of a settlement's mettle came during crises. When the Black Death emptied half of Europe's homes, cities with diversified trade like Venice with its ships and banks bounced back faster than towns reliant on a single crop. Over centuries, this ruthless sorting created a landscape we still recognize today, a scattering of global cities surrounded by regional players, their fortunes etched not in stone, but in the ever-shifting tides of commerce. The ghostly outlines of failed markets lingered: two abandoned wharves where no ships dock, overgrown fairgrounds where no laughter echoes. They're silent reminders that in the medieval world, standing still meant fading away. In the shadow of cathedral spires and bustling guild halls, another kind of marketplace thrived, one that operated on parchment and promises rather than piles of grain. Jewish merchants, often confined to the margins of medieval society, became the invisible architects of Europe's financial system. While Christian usury laws forbade lending money at interest, Jewish traders stepped into this gap, not out of choice but necessity. Barred from owning land or joining craft guilds, they turned to finance as a lifeline, unwittingly laying the foundations for modern banking. A Lombard moneylender might demand collateral, but a Jewish lender often accepted something even more valuable: trust, backed by networks stretching from Cordoba to Constantinople. These connections were the medieval equivalent of a financial wire service. A Jewish merchant in Mainz could issue a letter of credit to a cousin in Marseille, allowing a wool trader to access funds across borders without risking robbery on the roads. Their ledgers weren't just account books, they were maps of an underground economy, tracking debts that knit together distant markets. When a French vineyard needed barrels from Germany or a Spanish duke required Florentine armor, Jewish financiers made it possible through webs of reciprocal loans. Their system was so efficient that kings and bishops who publicly condemned usury privately relied on their services, even as they scapegoated them for economic crises. The price of this financial prowess was relentless persecution. During the Crusades, mobs burned Jewish quarters under the pretext of religious zeal, only to later beg for loans to fund their own expeditions. In England, Edward I expelled all Jewish citizens in 1290, confiscating their wealth, only to watch his treasury crumble without their financial acumen. Yet through expulsions, pogroms, and punitive taxes, Jewish communities adapted. Some specialized in rare goods like medicinal spices or dyestuffs, trades that required deep cross-cultural knowledge. Others became masters of currency exchange, their stalls in places like Frankfurt's Judengasse serving as medieval ATMs where florins, groats, and dinars changed hands. What's often overlooked is how these merchants shaped urban life beyond finance. In cities like Toledo and Prague, Jewish quarters became hubs of intellectual exchange, where Arabic medical texts met Hebrew philosophy and Christian scholasticism. Their market stalls didn't just deal in coins, they traded ideas, introducing innovations like double-entry bookkeeping to wider Europe. Even their alphabet left marks. The word check comes from the Hebrew sak, meaning contract, a remnant of their financial instruments. The true legacy of medieval Jewish merchants isn't just in balance sheets, it's in the stubborn resilience of a people who turned exclusion into expertise. While guilds built walls, they built bridges, proving that commerce at its best isn't just about profit. It's about persistence, ingenuity, and the quiet power of keeping the world's accounts balanced when no one else would dare. Walk through any medieval marketplace, and you'd likely hear the sharp bargaining of women selling everything from candles to fine lace. While guild records might list male masters, the daily reality of trade was far more inclusive, just not always in ways that made it into official documents. Take the Ives, women who dominated brewing before it became a lucrative male-run industry. With a keen eye for quality grain and fermentation, these entrepreneurs supplied something every town needed: cheap, safe ale, often sold right from their homes with a distinctive broomstick placed outside as a sign. Their work wasn't just a side hustle. In places like London, alewives accounted for nearly a third of all brewing licenses. Then there were the silk merchants of Lucca women like Giovanna Senami, who inherited her husband's thriving trade network and expanded it across Europe. Widowhood often unlocked unexpected power. With no male heir, a woman could suddenly control vast commercial interests. In 14th century Paris, the tax rolls reveal women running nearly 40% of businesses, from candle making to luxury cloth. Some, like the legendary Marguerite de Hainaut, even financed international trade expeditions, her ships carrying Flemish wool to Italy and returning with silks dyed with rare pigments from the East. But these success stories mask a harder truth. Women faced invisible barriers at every turn. Many guilds explicitly barred female members, forcing them to operate in unofficial shadow markets. A seamstress in Cologne might produce exquisite embroidery, but only through a male relative's guild license. Others worked as Regulators, buying goods wholesale and reselling them at market, a practice often condemned as profiteering when done by women, yet accepted as savvy business when men did it. Even their tools tell a story. Archaeological digs uncover smaller scales and measures in women's market stalls, suggesting they specialized in portions for the poor, selling pennyworths of pepper or thread by the inch. The most revealing evidence of their influence, the panic when men tried to push them out. When German cities attempted to ban women from brewing in the 15th century, riots erupted over soaring ale prices. In York, records show husbands secretly putting property in their wives' names to skirt guild restrictions, proving that the market relied on women's labor even as it denied them credit. What survives today are fragments, a ledger entry here, a court case there, but pieced together, they reveal a bustling parallel economy. From the butter markets of Ireland to the spice stalls of Venice, women weren't just bystanders in medieval commerce. They were its hidden engine, turning every exclusion into an opportunity, every constraint into a niche. Their legacy isn't in guild halls or charters, but in the quiet persistence of those who kept the wheels of trade turning, one carefully measured sale at a time. Keeping a medieval city fed was like conducting an orchestra where every instrument played a vital role, and the marketplace was the grand stage where this symphony of survival unfolded. Picture the daily miracle. Before dawn, carts creaked into town loaded with sacks of grain from nearby fields, barrels of milk still warm from the cows, and sides of beef butchered just hours earlier. But what truly transformed these simple ingredients into urban lifelines was the intricate system behind their journey. Farmers within a 20-mile radius knew their exact market day: Tuesday for eggs in Chester, Friday for cheese in Tours, timing their harvests to when hungry city dwellers would pay top coin. This wasn't just about selling crops, it was about precision logistics centuries before the term existed. The real magic happened with the arrival of goods that couldn't be grown locally. A single ship docking in Genoa might carry Sicilian wheat, Cypriot salt, and Andalusian olives, essentials that turned bland porridge into palatable meals. Salt alone was a game changer. Without it, meat spoiled within days, but preserved with this white gold, a side of pork could feed a family for months. Spices like pepper and saffron weren't just luxuries, they masked the taste of borderline meat in summer heat, making markets the original food safety regulators. Even wine had a practical edge, safer to drink than cholera-ridden river water. It flowed into cities like Paris by the barrel load, turning taverns into hubs where news traveled as fast as the drink. Seasonal fairs acted as the medieval equivalent of bulk shopping clubs. When the autumn harvest glut drove grain prices down, shrewd city councils bought up surplus, storing it in granaries like the majestic Hal Oaks blaze in Provence. Come February, when frost gripped the fields, these reserves prevented starvation and riots. The accounts of Siena's city government show meticulous planning. Enough salted cod stocked to last through Lent when pious citizens shunned meat. Such foresight didn't just fill bellies, it maintained social order. A hungry populace was a rebellious one, and kings knew that well-fed cities were far less likely to revolt. Behind this system lay quiet revolutions in farming. The 3-field rotation: wheat one year, barley the next, then leaving land fallow, boosted yields by 50% compared to old methods. Peasants who once barely fed themselves now produced surplus for market, funded by urban merchants advancing seed money. Windmills and watermills, often financed by wealthy burghers, ground grain faster than hand querns, ensuring cities didn't grind to a halt awaiting flour. Even livestock breeding adapted. Cows in Flanders were selectively bred for higher butterfat content after dairy became a cash crop for the cloth industry's thirsty workers. The ultimate testament to these markets' success, population numbers. In the 12th century, London held around 15,000 souls. By 1300, it topped 80,000. Paris doubled in size, its market sprawling across the right bank where farmers from the Île-de-France region jostled to sell to the highest bidder. This growth wasn't accidental, it was calculated. Every new bakery, every fishmonger's stall, every wine cart represented a thread in the safety net that allowed artisans to quit farming and specialize. The tailor stitching doublets, the blacksmith forging nails, the mason carving cathedrals, stones none could have existed without the certainty that their next meal was just a market square away. What's astonishing isn't just the scale of this system, but its fragility. A single bad harvest or a frozen river could send prices skyrocketing overnight. Yet for centuries, these markets danced on the knife's edge of sufficiency, proving that commerce, when woven into the fabric of daily life, doesn't just move goods, it builds civilizations one loaf, one barrel, one spice sack at a time. Cloth was more than just fabric in the Middle Ages. It was liquid gold, woven into the very foundations of power. Picture a Flemish weaver hunched over his loom, his calloused fingers guiding threads that would one day drape the shoulders of kings. The wool trade didn't just clothe Europe, it built empires. In England, entire monasteries and castles rose from the profits of sheep grazing on the Yorkshire dales, their fleeces so prized that customs records from the Port of London show millions of pounds exported annually. But the real alchemy happened in Flanders, where raw English wool met Flemish skill. Cities like Bruges and Ghent became medieval Silicon Valleys of textile innovation, their workshops perfecting techniques to weave wool so fine it could pass through a ring. The scale of this industry was staggering. A single Florentine cloth merchant might employ hundreds, from carders untangling raw fleece to dyers boiling vats of woad for that signature deep blue. The famed Art della Lana Guild in Florence controlled every step, enforcing quality standards so strict that defective cloth was publicly burned in the Piazza della Signoria. This wasn't just about craftsmanship, it was about branding. Florentine scarlet cloth, dyed with rare Kermes insects from the Mediterranean, became a status symbol from Paris to Constantinople, its price per yard exceeding a month's wages for most laborers. Wars were fought over these threads. When England temporarily banned wool exports to Flanders in the 1370s to pressure political rivals, entire Flemish cities teetered on rebellion. The crisis birthed an audacious workaround: smuggling. Coastal villages from Norfolk to Zealand became hubs of nocturnal activity, with fishermen rowing bales of wool across moonlit channels. Meanwhile, Italian bankers like the Bardi family financed both sides of the conflict, their ledgers tracking loans secured against future cloth profits. The legacy of this trade is etched in Europe's landscape. The towering cloth hall of Ypres, with its 300 stalls, still stands as a monument to wool's golden age. In England, the sheep-filled Cotswolds retain their medieval wealth in honey-colored stone villages built by wool merchants. Even language bears witness terms like broker and spinster originate from textile markets. But perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in the delicate balance of supply chains. When the Black Death decimated both sheep flocks and weavers, prices seesawed wildly, proving that even the mightiest economies rested on something as fragile as a single thread. A pinch of saffron could buy a peasant's cow, and a sack of pepper might ransom a knight. Such was the dizzying value of spices in medieval Europe. These aromatic treasures from distant lands weren't just culinary luxuries. They were a form of currency, a display of power, and even a medicine believed to ward off plague. The journey of a single clove from the Moluccas to a Venetian banquet table was an epic saga of caravans braving bandit-infested deserts, ships dodging monsoons, and merchants haggling in bustling bazaars where the air itself smelled of profit. Consider the humble peppercorn. Grown in the monsoon-drenched hills of India's Malabar coast, it passed through the hands of Arab traders who spun tales of serpent-infested jungles to justify sky-high prices. By the time these black pearls reached European markets, their value had multiplied 1,000-fold. In 12th century London, a pound of pepper could pay a month's rent for a craftsman's workshop, while in the courts of Burgundy, nobles displayed silver pepper mills like crown jewels. The spice rack of a wealthy household wasn't just a kitchen tool, it was a locked chest, often listed separately in wills alongside gold and silks. The spice trade's true power lay in its ability to reshape geography. When Mongol conquests briefly united Asia under one rule in the 13th century, Venetian merchants like Marco Polo could travel safely along the Silk Road, bringing back not just spices but revolutionary ideas, like the concept of paper money from China. Later, when Ottoman control choked off overland routes, Portuguese explorers risked everything to find sea paths around Africa. Vasco da Gama's 1498 voyage to India wasn't just about discovery. His ships returned laden with enough cinnamon and cloves to pay for the expedition 60 times over. Behind these grand narratives were countless unsung heroes. Jewish spice merchants in Alexandria perfected methods to test saffron's purity using dove feathers. If the yellow stain didn't fade, it was genuine. In Constantinople, Byzantine officials developed elaborate systems to tax spices passing through the Golden Horn, while in Bruges, apothecaries ground cinnamon with sugar as a remedy for everything from bad breath to melancholia. Even pirates played their part. North African corsairs knew a captured spice galley meant instant wealth, sometimes abandoning other plunder to seize sacks of nutmeg. The legacy of this trade lingers in unexpected places. Modern stock exchanges trace their roots to Amsterdam's 17th century spice futures market, where contracts for unmade voyages were bought and sold. The very word salary comes from the Roman practice of paying soldiers in salt, another precious commodity, and those winding alleys in medieval cities lined with spice shops. They became the first specialty retail districts, ancestors of today's shopping streets. What began as a quest for flavor ended up redrawing maps, financing empires, and connecting continents. Every time we shake pepper onto a meal or scent a holiday dish with cinnamon, we're tasting the echoes of an era when these aromas could launch ships, topple kingdoms, and change the course of history. The medieval spice trade didn't just season food, it seasoned the entire modern world. The year 1348 dawned with empty market squares across Europe, stalls abandoned, goods rotting where they lay, and the eerie silence of a world that had lost nearly half its people. The Black Death didn't just kill millions, it tore apart the very fabric of medieval commerce, leaving survivors to navigate an economy turned upside down. But from this devastation emerged something unexpected, a marketplace reborn. With entire villages wiped out and fields lying fallow, the survivors suddenly found themselves in high demand. A farmhand who once earned pennies could now command double wages, while skilled craftsmen saw their incomes triple as competition for their labor intensified. The old feudal order, where serfs toiled for lords in exchange for protection, crumbled under the weight of scarcity because when there are fewer hands to work the land, those hands gain bargaining power. This newfound wealth didn't just fill pockets, it changed tastes. Peasants who had once worn homespun wool now splurged on dyed linens from Flanders. Families that had eaten gruel and turnips could suddenly afford spices like pepper and cinnamon, once reserved for nobles. In Florence, tax records reveal a startling trend. The average artisan's household owned more luxury goods in 1350 than they had in 1340. Demand for fine fabrics, glassware, and even books surged, creating opportunities for merchants savvy enough to pivot. Italian silk weavers, for instance, shifted from producing exclusively for aristocrats to crafting smaller, cheaper pieces for the rising middle class. The plague had inadvertently democratized luxury. Trade routes twisted into new shapes as well, with traditional overland paths now dotted with ghost towns. Maritime commerce exploded. Venetian galleys that once carried bulk grain began loading holds with higher value goods, perfumes from Cyprus, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, items light enough to turn a profit even with smaller crews. In the Baltic, the Hanseatic League capitalized on labor shortages by mechanizing production, using water-powered sawmills to cut timber faster than hand tools ever could. Even the humble innkeeper found new fortunes, as traveling merchants willing to brave the post-plague world paid premium rates for safe lodgings and stables. Perhaps the most profound shift was the death knell for feudalism. When entire noble families perished, their lands often passed to survivors who had no interest in maintaining the old system. Former serfs migrated to cities in droves, lured by wages and freedom. Towns like Nuremberg and Strasbourg swelled, their markets buzzing with a new class of urban consumers. Guilds, once tightly controlled, now scrambled to admit apprentices, even relaxing strict rules to replenish their ranks. The result, a more fluid society where birth mattered less than skill, and where a butcher's son could rise to become a master goldsmith if he had the talent. The Black Death's greatest legacy wasn't just in the lives it took, but in the opportunities it unleashed. Markets adapted with ruthless efficiency, proving that commerce could flourish even in the shadow of catastrophe. What emerged from the ashes wasn't merely a recovery, it was a revolution, one that paved the way for the Renaissance, the rise of capitalism, and ultimately the modern world. The plague had shown Europe a brutal truth. When the old order collapses, those quick enough to adapt don't just survive, they thrive. Imagine carrying a chest of gold coins through bandit-infested forests just to buy silk in another city. That was the daily risk medieval merchants faced until banking reinvented commerce. The real breakthrough came not from kings or castles, but from wooden benches in Italian piazzas. In Florence's bustling Mercato Vecchio, money changers called banchieri literally set up benches to weigh coins and calculate exchange rates. These humble stalls evolved into Europe's first banks, solving two critical problems: how to move money without moving actual coins, and how to fund risky trade ventures without bankrupting nobles. The most powerful among them, the Medici, didn't just keep ledgers, they built an empire that bankrolled popes, commissioned Michelangelo, and turned Florence into the financial capital of the world. The genius of medieval banking lay in its instruments. Take the letter of credit, a simple parchment that let a merchant in Bruges withdraw funds from a Medici branch in Venice using nothing but a secret cipher. This was the medieval version of wire transfers, eliminating the need for dangerous cash caravans. Even more revolutionary were bills of exchange, essentially early checks that allowed traders to promise payment after goods were sold. A Flemish clothier could buy Italian silk with a bill payable in 6 months, giving him time to sell the finished garments before settling the debt. These innovations didn't just facilitate trade, they accelerated it, turning what used to be year-long transactions into matters of weeks. Risk management became an art form. When the Bardi family of Florence loaned enormous sums to England's King Edward III for his wars, they didn't put all their gold in one royal purse. They syndicated the risk, creating what we'd now call a consortium with other banking houses. Though Edward famously defaulted in 1345, bankrupting the Bardis, the system survived. Banks began demanding collateral like the future wool harvests of English monasteries and charging interest discreetly through exchange rate adjustments to skirt church usury laws. Their account books reveal astonishing sophistication, double-entry bookkeeping, profit calculations, even early forms of overdraft protection for favored clients. The social impact was seismic. For the first time, wealth wasn't just about land or titles. A shrewd banker could outloan a duke. The Medici vaults became so influential that their florin currency became the euro of its day, accepted from London to Jerusalem. But this power came with peril. When the Sienese banker Bernardino Tolomei criticized local officials, his entire bank was confiscated overnight. Other financiers treaded carefully, funding cathedrals and charities to buy goodwill. Their legacy isn't just in balance sheets. It's in the very architecture of cities like Siena, where the stunning Palazzo Salimbeni still houses the world's oldest surviving bank. What medieval bankers understood and what still resonates today is that trust is the real currency. Their systems worked because merchants believed a scrap of parchment from a Florentine bank had value across continents. That leap of faith created something far more valuable than gold, a network of credit that turned local markets into a global economy. The next time you swipe a credit card or transfer funds with a tap, remember, you're using a technology forged on those wooden benches 8 centuries ago, where the real magic wasn't in the coins, but in the collective belief that a promise could be as solid as gold. Walk through the cobbled streets of a medieval city, and you're stepping into a masterclass in urban efficiency. Every alley, square, and gate was meticulously designed to serve the beating heart of commerce. Take the grand market squares like Brussels Grand Place or Krakow's Rheineck-Glonny. Their vast open spaces ringed by guild halls and merchant houses. These weren't just pretty gathering spots. They were logistical hubs where carts could unload, crowds could circulate, and goods could be displayed under the watchful eyes of inspectors. The very shape of these plazas, often rectangular or trapezoidal, wasn't accidental. It maximized stall space while ensuring sunlight reached every corner, critical for judging the quality of fabrics or spices. But the genius of medieval urban planning extended far beyond the main square. Whole districts specialized by trade, their layouts fine-tuned for efficiency. In cities like Cordoba, tanneries clustered downstream along rivers, their noxious fumes carried safely away from residential areas. The leatherworkers' quarters of medieval York still bear names like Skeldergate, from the Old Norse for shield maker, hinting at streets once lined with workshops producing armor and saddles. Even the width of lanes was deliberate, broader avenues for ox-drawn carts hauling grain, narrower alleys for foot traffic to silk merchant stalls. Defensive walls, often seen as purely military features, doubled as economic tools. Gates weren't just choke points for defense, they were customs stations where tolls were collected. The iconic London Bridge wasn't merely a crossing, it was a shopping mall in stone, lined with multi-story buildings housing chapels, bakeries, and even a royal treasury. Every inch of space paid its way. Meanwhile, harbors like those in Lubeck or Genoa were engineered with commerce in mind, their quays angled to shield merchant ships from storms, their warehouses equipped with pulley systems to hoist goods directly from holds. The legacy of this planning whispers through modern cities. The grid layouts of Barcelona's Eixample or New York's financial district owe much to medieval principles of accessibility and zoning. Suburban shopping districts, they're distant cousins of the ribbon markets that grew along roads leading to city gates. Even today's mixed-use developments, where shops nestle beneath apartments, mirror the vertical living of medieval burghers who kept their workshops on ground floors and homes above. What medieval planners understood and what we're rediscovering is that cities thrive when form follows function. Their designs weren't about grand monuments, but about creating ecosystems where a farmer's cart could unload at dawn, a weaver's cloth could be inspected by noon, and a banker's gold could be secured by nightfall. In an age without zoning laws or traffic engineers, they built machines for living and trading that still hum centuries later. The Champagne fairs didn't just move goods, they moved entire economies. Picture a whirlwind of activity under vast canvas tents, where a Flemish wool merchant might strike a deal with an Italian banker using handwritten contracts in Latin, while nearby, a German miner haggled over copper prices with a Spanish shipbuilder. These weren't casual market days, they were meticulously scheduled events that followed an almost liturgical calendar. Troyes hosted the summer fair for cloth and leather, while Provence took over in autumn with spices and metals. Each gathering had its own rhythm: days for setting up, weeks for trading, and finally, the solemn settling of debts before the caravan bells rang again. What made these fairs revolutionary was their system of trust. In an era when a merchant's word might be the only guarantee across hundreds of miles, the fairs developed mechanisms to enforce agreements. Notaries scribbled down transactions in duplicate ledgers, creating early versions of binding contracts. Disputes were settled by fair courts that operated with startling efficiency, cases often resolved in a single day to avoid delaying commerce. The law merchant, a universal code respected from London to Venice, ensured that a deal made in Champagne held weight back in a merchant's home city. This was globalization in its infancy, built not on treaties but on the shared understanding that reputation was more valuable than gold. The financial innovations born here still shape our world. Italian bankers set up temporary branches offering letters of credit, allowing a merchant to deposit coins in Troyes and withdraw equivalent funds in Genoa minus a modest fee, of course. These transactions birthed the concept of clearinghouses, where debts between merchants were netted against each other to minimize actual coin transfers. The Champagne fairs essentially invented the medieval version of wire transfers, reducing the need for risky shipments of silver. Even the idea of futures trading took root here, with contracts for wool shipments to the following season changing hands at steep discounts. Beyond economics, the fairs were cultural melting pots. A Provençal troubadour might pick up Persian lute techniques from a Mongol trader, while a Parisian scholar debated Arabic medicine with a Sicilian interpreter. The fair's polyglot chaos gave rise to specialized professions like the dragomans, who interpreted between a dozen languages, or the hostelers, who provided not just lodging but warehousing and security for goods. The greatest legacy, though, was intangible: the realization that borders were porous to commerce long before they were to armies. When a Florentine silk seller could trust a Lithuanian amber trader enough to extend credit until next year's fair, it proved that trade routes weren't just paths for goods, they were synapses connecting the medieval mind. The decline of the Champagne fairs came not from failure but from their own success. As Italian ships grew capable of bypassing overland routes, and as cities like Bruges developed permanent exchanges, the need for seasonal gatherings faded. But their DNA lives on in every modern trade summit, commodities market, and international arbitration court. The next time you swipe a credit card or check a stock ticker, remember, you're participating in a system those medieval merchants would recognize instantly, forged under canvas tents 8 centuries ago. The shimmering trade routes that crisscrossed medieval Europe and beyond weren't just pathways for silks and spices. They were hunting grounds for pirates and bandits who saw every laden ship or merchant caravan as a golden opportunity. Imagine a Venetian galley heavy with Egyptian cotton and Syrian glass, its crew scanning the horizon not for storms, but for the telltale silhouettes of North African corsair ships. These weren't random criminals. They were highly organized enterprises with spies in port cities tipping them off about valuable cargoes and departure times. In the Baltic, the Victual Brothers, a notorious pirate guild, even controlled fortified islands, operating like a medieval mafia that extorted protection money from Hanseatic merchants. On land, the dangers were just as deadly. A train of Flemish wool wagons winding through the Brenner Pass might suddenly find itself ambushed by bandits who knew every twist in the mountain trails. These highwaymen weren't always lone outlaws. Sometimes they were disgraced knights or even rival merchants disguising robbery as toll collection. The accounts of a 14th century German trader reveal the constant anxiety. His ledgers include line items for bribes to local warlords just to ensure safe passage through their territories. But merchants weren't helpless. Port cities like Genoa and Barcelona built towering lighthouses not just to guide ships, but to spot pirates from miles away. The wealthiest trading houses pooled resources to hire private armies, the medieval equivalent of security contractors whose armored knights escorted caravans across the Alps. Some solutions were ingeniously low-tech. Venetian ships often sailed in convoys, their decks lined with archers, while Hanseatic cogs designed special compartments to hide gold beneath false floors. The most surprising twist: many rulers played both sides. English kings like Henry III issued letters of marque, essentially licenses for privateers to attack foreign ships, as long as they shared the plunder with the crown. In the Mediterranean, the Knights Hospitaller ran a protection racket, offering insurance to merchants while also funding their operations by seizing unprotected vessels. This blurred line between piracy and statecraft forced merchants to innovate. Out of this chaos emerged two game-changing concepts: marine insurance and admiralty law. Italian bankers began underwriting voyages, calculating risks based on pirate activity and weather patterns, an early form of actuarial science. By the 15th century, the first dedicated insurance markets appeared in Bruges and Florence, where merchants could buy policies scribbled on parchment. Meanwhile, maritime courts in places like Barcelona developed standardized procedures for adjudicating disputes over captured ships, laying the foundation for international trade law. The legacy of this arms race between thieves and traders still shapes commerce today. Modern shipping lanes follow paths first secured by medieval convoy systems, while the very idea of insuring goods against lost traces back to those desperate deals struck in smoky taverns by merchants who knew the sea was as full of predators as it was of profit. What began as a struggle for survival became the scaffolding of global trade, proof that even in the shadow of danger, commerce finds a way. Step into the clamor of a medieval marketplace before dawn, and you'd hear the first advertising jingles of the day, not from radios but from human voices. Criers hired by bakers, butchers, and vintners roamed the streets like living billboards, belting out rhymes about today's fresh loaves or discounted cuts of meat. These weren't random shouts, they followed strict ordinances. In London, regulations demanded criers announce prices truthfully, with fines for those caught exaggerating. A fishmonger's cry might carry the rhythm of a sea shanty: oysters fine, plump and sweet, caught this morn by Billingsgate Fleet, while a cloth seller's pitch could mimic the cadence of a church chant, drilled into memory through nightly rehearsals. Visual advertising was just as strategic. Walk down any bustling trade street, and shop signs swung overhead like a gallery of symbols: a golden pretzel for the baker, a wooden shoe for the cobbler, a crimson-striped pole for the barber surgeon. These weren't mere decorations, they served a vital function in an era when many customers couldn't read. The signs followed guild-mandated designs, so consistency built trust. A 3-barrel sign in Cologne meant the same quality of ale as one in Frankfurt. Some merchants took it further. Drapers hung bolts of brightly dyed fabric from upper windows like cascades of silk rain, while goldsmiths placed polished silver cups in sunlight to blind passers-by with reflected glints. The medieval equivalent of brand loyalty hinged on reputation. A baker convicted of selling undersized loaves might be dragged through the streets with the offending bread tied around his neck, a grim but effective Yelp review. Guilds enforced quality control through marks stamped onto goods: a pewterer's touchmark on tankards, a weaver's seal stitched into cloth. These weren't just labels, they were legal guarantees. In Nuremberg, metalworkers registered their personal marks with the city council, creating one of history's earliest trademark systems. A shopper could trace a shoddy dagger back to its maker through these symbols, much like checking a modern barcode's origin. Sample tables became the medieval version of free trials. Cheesemongers handed out slivers on wooden picks, winemakers offered tastings in horn cups, and spice sellers burned incense like cinnamon to waft aromas over the crowd. In Venice, glassblowers staged live demonstrations, turning molten blobs into delicate goblets before spectators' eyes, a spectacle that turned bystanders into buyers. Even the layout of stalls was strategic. Butchers placed their bloodiest work up front to prove freshness, while apothecaries arranged exotic curios like crocodile skulls to lure the curious. The echoes of these tactics surround us today. The rhythmic chants of medieval criers evolved into radio jingles, guild seals into corporate logos, and sample tables into Costco freebies. What's striking isn't how primitive these methods seem, but how sophisticated they were, proof that the human psychology of persuasion hasn't changed. Whether it's a 14th century fish seller shouting about the day's catch or a TikTok influencer unboxing products, the core remains identical: grab attention, build trust, and make the sale before the sun sets. Crossing a medieval bridge with a cartload of goods wasn't just about navigating rickety planks, it was a financial obstacle course. Every few miles, merchants faced toll collectors leaning from wooden booths, hands outstretched for coins that could make the difference between profit and loss. These weren't random shakedowns, they were meticulously calculated fees recorded in ledgers that still survive today. In the Austrian Alps, the Alpine Toll Register of 1349 lists exact payments: 12 pfennigs for a wagon of salt, 8 for a barrel of wine, even 2 for a single peasant carrying cheese. Such records reveal more than tax rates, they're snapshots of an economy in motion, showing which goods moved where and how much rulers thought they could squeeze from traders without killing the golden goose. The logic behind these tolls was deceptively simple. A lord who controlled a bridge over the Rhine or a mountain pass like the Brenner could essentially print money by taxing every pair of oxen, every bale of wool, every pilgrim's satchel that crossed. The cash funded everything from paving muddy roads to hiring mercenaries. In England, the construction of London Bridge was financed by wool taxes so heavy that Flemish weavers briefly revolted. But the system had a fatal flaw: greed. When Duke Leopold of Austria raised Danube tolls too high in the 1320s, entire merchant caravans abandoned the route, cutting his income in half within a year. Clever traders turned tax avoidance into an art form. Some took perilous detours through bandit-infested forests to evade customs posts. Others disguised luxury goods as humble cargo, silk hidden beneath sacks of grain, spices mixed with flour. In Geno's port records, customs officers grumble about merchants unloading goods offshore under cover of darkness, rowing them to beachside caves beyond the city walls. The most brazen even played kingdoms against each other. A Hanseatic merchant might route his Baltic timber through Poland instead of Prussia, simply because King Casimir offered a 2-year tax holiday to jumpstart his economy. These struggles birthed early forms of trade diplomacy. Italian city-states negotiated reciprocal toll reductions for their merchants abroad, while the Hanseatic League used its collective might to bully rulers into lowering fees. The Venetian Fondaco dei Tedeschi, a walled compound for German traders, wasn't just a warehouse, it was a tax haven where goods could be stored duty-free until sold. Even religious orders got in on the act. The Templars offered armed escorts through high toll zones, their reputation so fearsome that few collectors dared overcharge them. What's astonishing isn't the taxes themselves, but what they paid for. The soaring towers of San Gimignano, financed by saffron tolls, the massive walls of Carcassonne. Built with fees on Languedoc wine, medieval infrastructure literally rose from the coins coaxed from merchants' purses, yet these systems were fragile. When French kings taxed the Champagne fairs into oblivion, the commerce simply migrated to Bruges. When Byzantine emperors grew too reliant on Golden Horn customs revenue, they left their treasury vulnerable to the Fourth Crusade's sacking. The deeper lesson lies in the records these taxes left behind. Customs rolls from ports like Southampton list everything from Icelandic falcons to Armenian pigments, painting a vivid picture of globalized trade centuries before the term existed. A single page from Lübeck's toll book might reveal Norwegian timber bound for Egypt, English tin headed to India, and Persian carpets destined for Burgundian castles. These inked numbers tell a truth that transcends time. Commerce will always find a way, whether it's dodging a 10th century toll collector or navigating a modern tariff war. The dance between profit and taxation isn't just medieval history, it's the eternal rhythm of markets. The clatter of wooden type being inked and pressed onto parchment marked more than just the birth of books. It sparked an economic earthquake that reshaped how medieval Europe conducted business. Before Gutenberg's invention in the 1440s, merchants relied on handwritten ledgers prone to smudges, forgeries, and costly mistakes. A single misread digit in a wool contract could bankrupt a trader, while price fluctuations in distant markets often arrived too late to be useful. The printing press changed everything by standardizing commerce itself. Suddenly, identical copies of price lists for Flemish wool or Venetian glass could circulate from Lisbon to Lübeck, creating the first semblance of transparent markets. Consider the humble price current, single sheet bulletins that began appearing in commercial hubs like Antwerp and Augsburg. These early newsletters listed exchange rates, commodity prices, and shipping schedules, the Bloomberg terminals of their day. A merchant in Genoa could now consult printed tables showing the going rate for Sicilian grain before placing orders, eliminating the guesswork that once led to wild price swings. Nuremberg's printers even produced specialized catalogs for the semi-annual Frankfurt Fair, allowing buyers to preview goods before traveling. This wasn't just convenience, it was a radical shift toward data-driven decision-making. The reliability of printed contracts alone revolutionized long-distance trade. Where once a deal with a Baltic timber supplier required trusting a scribe's shaky handwriting, now notarized forms with identical text could be sealed at both ends. Fraud plummeted as watermarks and standardized typefaces made forgery harder. Banking saw perhaps the greatest transformation. Printed bills of exchange reduced disputes over interest rates and repayment dates, while financial manuals taught merchants how to calculate compound interest using the new Hindu Arabic numerals. The Medici family famously printed encrypted ledgers, their intricate numbering systems now reproducible without transcription errors. Information velocity reshaped entire industries. When Portuguese explorers mapped sea routes to India, printers in Lisbon rushed out navigational guides with tide tables and coastal profiles. These manuals didn't just aid sailors, they empowered investors to back ventures with precise knowledge of journey durations and seasonal trade winds. Similarly, the rapid dissemination of mining techniques from Bohemia to Cornwall triggered a silver boom, as printed diagrams allowed prospectors to replicate German drainage systems. Knowledge became a tradable commodity itself. A Strasbourg printer might sell pamphlets on Venetian silk dyeing techniques to Lyon weavers, who then outcompeted local rivals. The psychological impact was just as profound. As printed calendars and almanacs spread, merchants began planning years ahead rather than seasonally. Standardized weights and measures, once decreed by local lords but inconsistently enforced, gained authority when stamped in type. Even superstition gave way to calculation, where traders once consulted astrologers for auspicious voyage dates. They now referenced printed ephemerides tracking planetary positions. The press didn't just inform commerce, it instilled a new mindset where precision and predictability trumped tradition. By the 1500s, the ripple effects were undeniable. The Hanseatic League, once reliant on couriers and memory, printed codified trade laws for all member cities. Italian banks issued uniform loan documents that crossed borders without translation. Perhaps most strikingly, the first printed stock lists appeared in Amsterdam, their columns of numbers and abbreviations forming the DNA of modern financial markets. What began as a machine for copying Bibles had become the nervous system of European commerce, proving that while goods moved on carts and ships, wealth truly flowed along rivers of ink. Walk down Wall Street today, and you're treading the same path medieval merchants once did, not just metaphorically, but literally. The very name Wall Street comes from the protective barrier Dutch settlers built in 17th century New York, mirroring the walls that once encircled medieval markets for security. This isn't coincidence, it's continuity. The shouting traders on stock exchange floors, haggling over fractions of a cent, are direct descendants of the wool merchants who once jostled in the champagne fairs, their voices rising in a cacophony of deals. Even modern shopping malls, with their food courts and specialty boutiques, are spiritual heirs to the guild-lined squares of Bruges or Florence, where every craft had its designated street and every product its place. The echoes of medieval commerce ring loudest in finance. When you swipe a credit card, you're invoking a system born from Italian bankers' ledgers, those same Florentine moneylenders who pioneered letters of credit to avoid carrying sacks of gold. The stock market itself is a grandchild of the medieval Bourse, named after the Van der Buers family's Bruges, in where merchants gathered to trade shares in spice voyages. Even modern insurance policies trace their roots to the maritime contracts drafted in Genoa's harbors, where shipowners pooled risk to survive pirate-infested waters. What began as makeshift solutions to medieval problems became the bedrock of global capitalism. Guilds, too, never truly disappeared, they just changed uniforms. The American Medical Association's strict licensing, a direct parallel to medieval guilds certifying master surgeons, labor unions fighting for fair wages. They're channeling the same collective bargaining power that let Flemish weavers defy feudal lords. Even today's artisanal movement, with its emphasis on craftsmanship and local sourcing, is a conscious revival of guild values where quality wasn't just a buzzword but a matter of civic pride. Walk into a Michelin-starred restaurant boasting house-made charcuterie, and you're glimpsing the ghost of a Strasbourg butcher's guild. their standards so rigorous that offending members were paraded through town with rotten meat around their necks. The cities that thrived then still dominate now, not by chance but by design. London's financial district clusters where the medieval wool exchange once stood, its skyscrapers occupying the same strategic real estate that drew merchants 8 centuries ago. Venice's Rialto Bridge remains a retail hotspot, just as it was when Marco Polo's family traded gems there. These urban centers didn't just survive, they evolved because their founders understood something we often forget. Commerce isn't just about transactions. It's about creating ecosystems where innovation, trust, and opportunity intersect. When a 12th century Parisian baker paid taxes to pave the streets leading to his shop, he wasn't just maintaining infrastructure, he was investing in the convenience that would lure customers back tomorrow. Perhaps the most profound legacy lies in mindset. The medieval merchant's willingness to risk everything on a shipment of pepper, to trust strangers across oceans and deserts built the first fragile threads of globalization. Today's supply chains may stretch farther and move faster, but they're still powered by that same audacious faith. Every time a startup founder pitches investors or a shopper buys from a stranger online, they're participating in a system forged in those noisy, smelly, gloriously chaotic market squares. The stalls may have been replaced by digital storefronts, the tally sticks by blockchain, but the human impulse remains unchanged. To connect, to trade, and through exchange, to build something greater than ourselves. The next time you pass a bustling commercial district, whether it's Tokyo's Akihabara or Berlin's Kudam, pause and listen. Beneath the neon and the noise, you can still hear the distant clink of medieval coins, the shouts of deals being struck, the rhythm of a dance that's been going on for 1,000 years. The markets never left, they just learned new steps. The story of medieval markets is more than a historical curiosity. It's the blueprint for modern urban life. From the first market charters to the rise of banking, every innovation paved the way for the cities we know today. These hubs of trade weren't just about profit, they were melting pots of culture, ideas, and progress. As we walk through today's bustling streets, we're walking in the footsteps of medieval merchants who built the foundations of our world. Think about the last time you swiped a credit card or ordered something online. That transaction, instantaneous and invisible, owes its existence to medieval money changers huddled over wooden benches, weighing coins and scribbling promises on parchment. The modern stock market, its roots stretch back to the shouting matches of the Champagne fairs, where deals were sealed with handshakes and sealed with wine. Even the concept of a weekend, those precious days of rest, traces back to medieval market schedules, when towns designated days off to let farmers and traders recover from the frenzy of commerce. But the real legacy of these markets isn't just in systems or structures, it's in the spirit they ignited. The medieval marketplace was the original startup incubator, where a blacksmith's son could rise to guildmaster, where a widow could turn her spice stall into a dynasty, where a simple idea like standardized weights could ripple across continents. It was a world where trust was currency, where a merchant's word could span oceans, and where the collective belief in fairness built cathedrals of commerce that still stand today. The next time you sip coffee in a bustling cafe or wander through a farmer's market, take a moment to listen. Beneath the hum of modern life, you'll hear the echoes of those medieval squares, the clink of coins, the chatter of deals, the unshakable human drive to connect, trade, and build. History isn't just something we read about, it's something we live in, shaped by those who came before us. And if those medieval merchants could see the world their innovations helped create, they'd probably nod in recognition, then start haggling over the price of a latte. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What medieval market would you most want to visit? Would it be the spice-scented alleys of Constantinople, the wool-packed wharves of Bruges, or maybe the champagne fairs under their fluttering canvas tents? Let us know and keep exploring the hidden stories beneath your city's streets. The past is closer than you